Good day, I'm Dr. T, and welcome to Timberborn, the newest game I am reviewing. I've had the game for about a week or so. It just recently launched, and I'm impressed with it. Now, New World's coming up. That's releasing on Tuesday. So I put about 30 hours into Timberborn, and it's probably going to get put to the side. But before I do that, I want to do a quick review video, give some thoughts. It's still early access. Hopefully it's going to be evolving a bit more in the future. But I'm digging this game. This seems pretty good. It's definitely got some press, which it deserves. Okay, so this is your standard base building game, like a lot that you see on my channel. This is kind of my thing. You know, I like other games too, but base building is kind of cool. Now, this one's got a couple of gimmicks to it. For starters, you'll notice that those aren't people walking across the screen. Those are giant beavers. And so the idea here, the plot is humanity has gone extinct or is just gone, and in our ruins has risen the beavers. And the beavers are intelligent now, and they're colonizing the planet. And so your goal is to shepherd a city of beavers to success and to make your beavers happy. Now, this game's got a couple of interesting gimmicks, and together they actually make a pretty good game. For starters, you have two factions. You start out with the Forktails, which are kind of your somewhat hippie beavers, which at least that's how they're made out to be. To be honest, they're just kind of, I think, the kind of default, what you would expect of a beaver faction. And then you have the Iron Teeth, which are supposed to be the edgy, we don't care about the environment beavers, but once again, they're just kind of beavers. They've got kind of a real communist vibe going on to them, which is just weird. So there's certain things about the factions that I like. Others are just like, okay, that's just kind of different to be different. The major difference between the factions, one is the art style. Their buildings look slightly different, some of the buildings at least, and that they have access to different buildings. So down below here, you've got a whole host of menus, kind of control menus, building menus, etc. And many of the buildings are the same between factions, but certain buildings are unique to each given faction. So for instance, with the kind of, edgy, don't care about the environment, Iron Teeth, trying to remember their name, they have engines which burn wood to produce power, which is actually an important feature. You'll notice that several of your buildings, I'll get to the power here in a bit. Whereas instead, the Forktails have windmills. Now, each have their advantages and disadvantages. The engines use firewood, which I would point, it's a biofuel, so that's not exactly that environmentally bad, especially since part of the game is doing a lot of tree farming. So this is really sustainably sourced biofuel. There's nothing edgy and destroying the environment about that. So you got the two factions. They got a couple of different buildings. The Iron Teeth are not as well flushed out as the Forktails. I think the Forktails are kind of a little bit better faction. It is your default starting faction, which I totally get why it is. Okay, so let's look at some kind of the key gameplay mechanics, one of which I alluded to was this idea of power. So a lot of the kind of production buildings require a source of energy, and this is going to be mechanical power. So it's kind of harkening back to almost kind of a steampunk beaver. In many cases, like almost literally. So you get a couple of power sources. You can have water wheels, which when the water is flowing, they're a great source of power, kind of your best option. The Iron Teeth have steam engines, the Forktails have windmills, and you also have like a treadmill, which is an absolutely terrible power source, but for early game, it's kind of really set there for early game, where a beaver's job is to run the treadmill. But, things go well. And then you have to connect them with power connections, which are basically large, turning shafts with gears, etc. And those then drive a lot of your industry buildings, which is a nice mechanic. I haven't seen that too awful much, and I like that. This game in general has a lot of these interesting little mechanics that play together to make you think a little bit more complicatedly, which is pretty nice. Now, I mentioned the water. That's actually one of the driving mechanics in this game. So this kind of, the demo, this was kind of an important feature, and this appears to have really been kicked up to 11 for the release game. So you'll notice here I've got water coming from kind of a spring over here. The water flows down a channel. I'm currently building some floodgates. I've got some dams. They're beavers. They're going to build dams. And this is going to be absolutely critical because partway through, I'll hit a drought. Now, in the demo, it was wet season versus dry season. It was very predictable. In the game, there's a little bit less predictability. The droughts start fairly short early on, and they get longer and longer and longer. So you have time to adapt to them by building things like dams because, once again, you're beavers. So you can build dams, and you're going to try and trap the water in. The reason you're going to want to do this, of course, even though the flowing water is needed to power the power wheels, having access to water is going to be needed for all of your crops, which you get to grow because, like just about any other base survival game or city survival game, you need food, and your beavers will starve to death if they don't get food. But also, you have to extract the water so that the beavers can drink it. And you can either put it into water storage vessels, these tanks over here, or you just dam up the river. That way you don't run out. And so what you'll notice is I've got a stream coming over here. It's got a dam here. This way I don't actually suck down this part dry so my trees stay watered. And if they get dried out for too long, then they die. And I have to replant them. I don't get the food or the wood from them necessarily. Or at least they don't grow up if they're a sapling. And then eventually I've got to have one more floodgate coming in over here. That'll allow me to trap it here. And then this area I can kind of suck down to give me kind of a water reserve. So yeah, you've got to play with your water. And that's actually one of the major mechanics of this game, which is really interesting. You've got your floodgates, you've got your dams. You can overflood areas. So if I stopper up these floodgates too much, and I let it, kind of fill up. One, the flow of the water is kind of subsided, but what you'll notice is this area should start flooding here fairly shortly. And my buildings will be kind of shut down temporarily, and the water will flow and kind of get everywhere, which ends up becoming fairly interesting. We can start to see the water flooding over here. And yes, we shut down my hauling hub. So yeah, I don't want to have a flood, so I'm going to open up my floodgate a little bit, let that water drain out. And yeah, so the water mechanics are really particularly interesting. You've got several choices for water control, including good old-fashioned dynamite. You can make a hole somewhere. They build the pile, and then it takes off one square. Now, there isn't a way to kind of just straight up replace it, but you do have these platforms, and these are going to be really useful. You can actually see a couple of them they have going in over here, making these a bridge, but this is a nice feature. I had to actually go into Steam forums to find this. You can start zooming down, and what you can see is you can build multiple layers. And so like over here, I've got some platforms holding up my water wheels, but that's accessible area. I've got a path down here. If a beaver wanted to, it could walk down there. Or, somewhat more complicated, I've got over here, I'm going to raise this up, well, no, I'm going to keep it going down. I've got platforms coming up, I've got my power connection going over here, I've got a bridge over the power connection, and you can get these kind of interesting 3D layered feels to things. So you're actually thinking in 3 dimensions. This is what I'm only really recently seeing. Back in the day there was Homeworld. Homeworld was, it had one difficulty setting, hard. And you actually had to do like space battles in 3D. Great game if you haven't played it. Strongly recommend it, but it's definitely not easy. Whereas this one, you're doing base building, but you're definitely doing so in 3 dimensions. And there are times like, well, how do I get these to connect? Well, I'm going to have to go over and under and whatnot, which definitely gives this nice depth that I wasn't really expecting. Definitely not from the demo. But then again, it was the demo. You didn't get to play that long in the demo. It allowed you to go through 2 seasons kind of thing. So you didn't get nearly to this size of, facilities. Now, as far as winning conditions, there aren't any, that at least not that I've detected. They don't have any achievements yet for Steam. I wish they would. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it'd be kind of cool. But one of kind of the driving features is you are trying to make your beavers happy. So, you have to keep them from starving to death. You have to give them a place to sleep. You got to get them water. Social life, which is going to be things such as these rooftop terraces or these campfires. And basically, meeting these needs means you need to build buildings. So for social life, you need to build those buildings. For fun, you need to build these merry-go-rounds. There's only currently one fun building and one religious building. I get kind of the one religious building, their temple, because it's kind of getting the feel that these two factions they're pretty ideologically divided. So I can get that they would each have their separate belief systems, although their temples look very similar. Not identical, but very similar. That said, fun. Hopefully, in later updates, there'll be more than just the carousel. That said, I mean, it's an interesting one. It's one of those kind of expensive to make. You have to provide it power. So it's one of the slightly more challenging ones to build. And so, yeah, this is an interesting game. It gives you a nice set of problems to address. You get some interesting tools, makes you think in 3 dimensions, which is not common, at least not from my experience. And the development of controlling the water and the power really makes you start thinking in a few different dimensions. Now, one of the features that I don't know if I like or not, I'm really undecided on this one, is you start out the game with these city centers. Now, this were not in the demo. The demo originally, you just started with like a builder's hut and a warehouse. But these city centers kind of start with that, but you'll notice how you have these green paths. And the key part of the game, kind of like a lot of city building games, you have to lay down roads. Roads are free in this game. Bridges aren't and that kind of stuff. But the roads are free. And then the influence of that city center goes down the roads, but it only goes so many tiles. And once it's out, it won't work. So for instance, I once had a rooftop terrace up here, but it wouldn't work because it was just beyond the reach of this city center. So this limits the size of each individual city area, but you are able to make multiple city centers. So down over here, I've got a different city center. It's got its zone of control, but they don't share the same resource pool. I can have these guys ship the resources to the other city center. The other city center has another one of those to ship it back. So I can ship resources back and forth between city centers, but they are pretty much independent cities. And I don't know if I like this or not. It adds another layer of interest to it. I'm really kind of building a regional community, but it definitely makes things a little bit harder. Like if I want to zoom down over here and put a dam there, which would actually be helpful, that would dam up this whole river up here, or even if I just want to put it a little further down, I would have to build an entire another city because this city center only reaches out to this dam. Now, I might be able to go a little bit further by straightening up my roads a little bit because it's going kind of like the tiles that the roads are going. So if I have a zigzaggy road, it won't go as far as if it's a nice straight road. But still, that is kind of awkward. Additionally, if I want to access these ruins, this city center is not going to cut it. It might actually. It might come real close. I might be able to come out here, up. It's going to be a real tight because that's already going orange. Yeah, I doubt I can get this one with this city center. I'd have to build another city center, which is not that bad, but it's also just kind of like if I just want to build one dam, a little bit like really all of that work for one dam. But otherwise, it does create interest. It does create more of kind of a community. I'm thinking of building communities and building these up, which is something I like, but I'm not 100% sold on. And just to be clear, your beavers can go through the water on the paths under the water. This was a big discussion in the demo. There was a whole thread, one of the longest Steam discussion threads I've ever seen. It was titled something like, Beavers Can Swim. Because in the demo, they couldn't. The water was a barrier. But now, as long as you got stairwells, as you just saw that beaver, down under there, they could access the ground. No problem underneath the water. They can't just like hop in and swim. I think they get a speed penalty for the water, which is like backwards. Beavers are much more at home in the water, and then they tolerate on land, not the other way around. But I mean, these are future alien future beavers that don't exist, and they live in cities and they have printing presses. So yeah, okay, I'll give them a pass. But still. So yeah, definitely a nice game. I like it. Couple things I wish they had. One, unless I have not been able to find it and it's sitting somewhere, you get your inventory, what do you have on hand, but you don't get any kind of like consumption statistics. I don't know how much food my beavers are eating. I can get a general idea by going, okay, this was more food than when I started recording, I think. So I'm producing more food than I'm consuming, but I don't have any graphs. A lot of your city builder games will give you graphs of how much food you have been consuming over time. Potentially, they make you build a place to do that, which is like, okay, I get that. But this one, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have that. Additionally, with all the work with water, I really would like aqueducts. You can have a building that pumps water into a ditch, so you can transport water without making it flow. But there are no like dedicated aqueducts. So if I wanted to get water from here to here, as you can see, they're both raised. I don't have a way of doing that without pumping the water out and then dumping it with one of the reverse pumps, which seems very inefficient, especially if I wanted to put, paddle wheels someplace else, or water wheels, I should say. So I really would like an aqueduct. I'm hoping that is coming as well. And then the other one comes to one of the sets of buildings. And that is the science buildings, in which case there's like one, which is the inventor's hut. So the idea on the science building, I have no idea why it was saying log there for a time, but these guys work, they produce science points. You can't build all of your buildings at once. A lot of them you have to unlock. So you can see several of these bridges I haven't unlocked, and it requires science points to unlock. And of course, I've accumulated a fairly large amount because this is a fairly developed community. I've been playing this particular map for a little while. This is an interesting feature, and I kind of like it as kind of a way of pacing things. Obviously, this is a classic. We're not going to give you access to everything or give you the stuff you need right off the bat. It makes you think a little bit strategically with what things you unlock. Like, you have to get that forester pretty quick because you're going to run out of your trees. You need to start sustainably farming trees. But they only have the one building. I really wish there was a couple more, like kind of like a lab where it would, make science faster. Because some of these, that bridge, I barely have enough science points to unlock the really long bridge, or like the monument, which I don't have enough science points to unlock. And this is kind of one of those makes your beavers happy. So something with, some kind of like more advanced building, etc., would be great. Maybe something that can stack. And that is something also I forgot to mention. Some of your buildings, like these barracks or those warehouses, can stack on top of each other. Once again, adding to this three-dimensional feel of the game, where you can stack buildings, you can make skyscrapers out of them. This particular faction's wood piles can stack, the forktails cannot. Either way. So yeah, that gives a lot of interesting input, and I would like to see a little bit more done with the science side. Once again, I'm hoping that's because this is early access, more is coming out with that. I've definitely posted on Steam saying, hey, could we have aqueducts? Could we have something a little bit more interesting for the science side? I mean, you've got an entire menu bar with one item. Let's fill that out, please. Okay, so this is Timberborn. A well-crafted game. I definitely enjoy it. Definitely one of those items where if I can get, something like $1 an hour of play. I'm happy with that. It's a nice indie title. It's currently going for, I think, like $25 or so on Steam. I'll probably have a correction on screen in post-production, which I think is well worth it for the game. Once again, I've got about 30 hours in game. I doubt I'm going to put that much more into it. I've kind of gone through everything there is for the current build. I hope future builds will expand a bit upon the game. But to be honest, even if they don't, this game is fun and playable, and I've already sunk 30-some hours into it. So I feel I've got my money worth, even if there aren't any future builds to this. So with that said, have a wonderful day.